Welcome back, everybody. This is the final of 3 parts in my lecture series on complex numbers. If you haven't watched the first 2, please go watch them before starting this video. In this one, we're going to learn about how to take principal square roots of more complicated negative numbers, and we're also going to look at how to simplify higher powers of I. Let's get started. Now, taking square roots of negative numbers is pretty straightforward. Taking higher indexed roots of negative numbers is pretty not straightforward, and we're not going to talk about it in this class. We're just going to talk about square roots of negative numbers. The square root of any negative number minus b, where b is positive here, so that's definitely a negative number, we call the principal square root of negative b I root b. And we get that simply by writing the square root of negative b as the square root of negative 1 times the square root of b. And we know the square root of negative 1 is I root b. So when we have a minus sign under the radical, I like to think about it as pulling an I out to make it positive. Unless by some crazy circumstance, whenever I ask you to take the square root of a number, I mean the principal square root of that negative number. Let's simplify each of the following. Well, in the first one, I have a negative sign under the radical. So remember, step 1 is to pull an I out. Well, not your literal eyeball, but pull an I out of the radical, and that'll clear the minus sign. And what I'm left with is a perfect square, 11. So 11i would be the square root of negative 121. Go ahead and pause the video here to see if you can do part B and C on your own. Hopefully B wasn't too much of a challenge. I pull the I out, and now I have a positive number under the square root, and I know the square root of 50 can be simplified as 25 times 2, or 5 I root 2. In part C, we have a few extra steps to fully simplify. Notice both of those terms have a negative sign under the radical, so I can pull an I out of both terms. Then I'm left with I root 18 plus I root 8. Both of those radicals can be simplified into 3 root 2 and 2 root 2, respectively. Now I can combine my like terms. Since I have 3 copies of I root 2, and I get 2 more copies of I root 2, I'm left over with 5 copies of I root 2. One more for you. See if you can pause the video here to try part D on your own. The answer that I found was 2 plus 6i root 7. Remember, to square a number, you multiply it by itself. This number that I'm squaring is 3 plus I root 7, so I need to multiply 3 plus I root 7 by itself. After foiling it out, I get 9 plus 3i root 7 plus 3i root 7 plus 7i squared. Fully simplifying that leaves me with 2 plus 6i root 7. Last problem for you to try on your own here. Give it a shot. The final answer I arrived at was negative 5/3 plus I root 2/3. The way that I got that was first by simplifying that radical. That's actually part B from above. So I know that radical is 5i root 2, and now I can divide both terms by 15. In the first term, I've got a factor of 5 that cancel top and bottom, and in the second term. That leaves me with the final answer. So, we've talked about how to take principal square roots. Now, let's talk about how to take higher powers of I. Remember that I is the square root of negative 1, and we used that reasoning to justify that I squared should be negative 1. So how about I cubed? Well, I cubed is just I squared times I, so it's negative I. And similarly, I to the fourth we could write as I squared times I squared, or negative 1 times negative 1, is positive 1. Go ahead and pause the video here. See if you can't fill out the next 4 on your own. Did you notice a pattern? We got the same 4 things. We went I minus 1 minus I1. I minus 1 minus I1. That pattern repeats indefinitely. Every 4 powers of I, we reset back to just being I. So we can use that fact to quickly compute powers of I. For example, in part A, when I'm looking at I to the 13th, I want to find the highest factor of 4 that fits in here, that being 12. So I know I to the 13th is I to the 12th times I. I to the 12th is I to the 4th cubed times I, or 1 cubed times I. That whole thing is I. Remember, every 4 powers of I get back to 1, so I to the 4th, 8th, 12th, 16th, and so on are all just 1. Similarly, if I start from I to the 1, 5, 9, and so on, those are all going to be just I. Go ahead and pause the video here to see if you can do parts B and C on your own. I arrived at the conclusion 1 and negative 1 respectively. In part B, I to the 60th is a power of I to the 4th. It's I to the 4th to the 15th, or I to the 4 times 15. That means it's just 1 to the 15th power, or 1. Similarly, in part C, I wanted to find the highest factor of 4 that fits into 74, that factor being 72. So I wrote this as I to the 72 times I squared. I to the 72 can be written as I to the 4th to the 18th, since 4 times 18 is 72. And I squared simplifies to negative 1. In the end, that gives me 1 to the 18th times minus 1, which is just minus 1. In this video, we took a look at how to compute principal square roots and how to find higher powers of I using some shortcuts. This is going to wrap it up for our series on complex numbers. Catch y'all on the next one.